So I'm going to talk about my latest project, which is related to the COVID-19 pandemic. But before that, I thought that it was perhaps a little more dynamic to give you some context of the things that I do. And what I do is mostly, well, it's not the only thing I do, but one of the things that I really interested in doing is the intersections of poetry primarily and technology. So I've been doing for the past couple of decades lots of works that are within the field of electronic literature. So that's why I want to start with some of my previous works to give you a sense of what is electronic literature. By the way, I'm originally from Spain. So I hope you can understand sometimes my accent, and I create primarily in Spanish. So what I'm going to do right now is to share my screen, and I'm going to give you this tour. I'm not going to start with this. So this is my webpage, and here is very simple, tinaescaja.com. And so you can see some of the works of electronic literature that I've been doing over the years. So you have an idea of what this is, what is electronic literature. In the year 2000, I did do my first hypertextual poem. So electronic literature, as you can imagine, or you can sense from what you are seeing here, is works of literature, in this case poetry, that are created using the internet, the electronic medium. So it needs to be created with programs that allow you to make works that, in this case, are or usually are interactive. So it's called hypertext because it's based on links. And if you read this poem, even though the original is in Spanish, the translation is by Helen Watt. This poem has a content related to this idea of connection, because it was my first venture into the electronic medium. Was through the computers, and these computers that I just started working with in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, allow me this new space, this new possibility of connection with as I call navigators, the readers and the people in the internet. So that was particularly fascinating and interesting for me. So you can see some of the aspects related to this particular poem, who has to do with that sense of connecting through the internet. So in content and also in the form is based on hypertext, on links. So as you see, it says I summon you. I have different languages too, also to create that sense of globality and interaction, global interaction. And this is the last scene. As you see, also there are some movements here. And there are words that don't really exist, not in Spanish, not in English. They are invented because, in a way, what I do, my sense of creating digital work in the internet is also an homage to the avant-garde. And in the avant-garde, there is this element of playful element, and also creating new words, new ways of experimenting. So you see blurring your line, my line, the line, my word in yours, my word is yours. So this is one of the 3 parts of this work. It was a triptych, but I was only able to make two of them, because that's the problem with technology. It can become very difficult to create, and it's also the obsolescence of some of these programs. These works of poetry I made with using Flash. And I'm actually considered not only a pioneer of electronic literature in Spanish, because I started publishing this in the year 2000. This is from the year 2000. But also I'm supposed to be Flash generation, and as perhaps you know, Flash disappeared a couple of years ago. So I lost this tool. So all what you are seeing is kind of a translation into HTML5. And so you see the SEO words, how they move, so you have a sense. So again, this is a triptych of 2 parts because I was completely unable to make the 3 of them simply for a lack of time and possibilities. Because I was doing it as my own investigation as a researcher of electronic literature, and also I had to give priority to my teaching at UVM. So question me in your role as reader, and I will know how to bite you when convenient. Excuse me. And this is from Charles Baudelaire. So this was my first electronic literature artifact, and I want to show you a couple of more things before going to the project itself for tonight's presentation. But some of them could be perhaps interesting, like the Código de Barras barcodes. This is a project. So usually my works of poetry are projects. You go beyond the book, but the book exists too. This is Código de Barras too. So it's barcode here. I don't know if you can see that. But Código de Barras is based on barcodes, but also is a very political work. More or less, it was related to the fact of questioning. It was during the war in Iraq, and I'm talking about some bars or limit. I was doing a criticism about the bars of imperialism, of informatic control, of consumerism, and you can see a little bit of the exhibitions, for example, in this beautiful place in Malpartida in Cáceres in Spain. It's an extraordinary Fluxus movement venue, museum. So here you can see how I'm using an eyesight as a reader of barcodes, which was what I was presenting in different museums and galleries, one of them at the University of Vermont. So I want to show you one example at least of the barcode project. So this particular one, this is the English translation. So you can hear voices and sounds related to this poem that has to do with domestic violence, with gender violence. So, and I have another one to show you just to have a sense of this kind of work using, in this case, barcodes. This is Una Grande y Libre, One Great and Free, which was what kind of the basic indication of the dictatorship during the Franco time. Una Grande y Libre, which is something I question because we are not one, we are many. We are not grande, no, we are not big, we are multiple, and we are definitely not free. So I did this work using the flag of the United States during this particular time during the war in Iraq. So one fun thing that I want to show you is this work. It's a work and a performance that I did with Shape in Spain. And the fun thing here is that what we did very gently, very nicely, we put these words that by themselves, these words have meaning, but then many of these words, when they get in contact with other words, they create new meanings. So the concept of random poetry and interspecies is quite literal here too. So here you are, the sheep around. This was an organic farm, so we really, it was very easy and very nicely treated this sheep, and this is part of the project. So what I'm presenting here is is one of the many permutations of poetry, being the poets, the sheep themselves as well. So let me go back. It's here, okay. Oh, here, sorry. Very similar way, one of the most successful projects I did is my robots. So here I am with one of the poems robots, robot poems. So again, we are in interspecies. I mean, what is something that I'm questioning here is what makes us human, and what is our relation with technology too. So my idea was to create 5 quadrupeds of insect-like models. I took these models. There are 3 different models. They are open source, so I got it from the internet, but I manipulated them, I changed them to create these 5 quadrupeds, and I collaborated with Wesley Alan Wright to do this, particularly the elements of the robotics itself. They move, they interact with each other, and it is all based on one poem. The poem is always the origin, and so you have the poem in the Spanish here and the English in the back. And the poem is created from the point of view of robots, and that is questioning our what makes us human, what makes us creator, who creates whom. So I think this existential point is very often part of what I'm trying to discern in many of my works. So you can go to, here are the panels. So see, these are the panels. I chose purposely organic elements to create that blurring of the lines between the mechanic and the organic. The same way I'm using also insect-like models to increase that sense of anxiety and distinction between not only technology and humans, but also insects and humans and other species. So here you have, so this was made with in a laser engraver and printer, actually here in Burlington, Vermont. I got a grant from Generator to be able to do this. And actually, if you have access to an app called Bleeper, you can see the robots in movement, how they move. These robots have sensors. They have sensors that I lost them. They have sensors here. You have the sensor here. You see that when they find an obstacle, being a person or another robot, they start to going backwards, which gives a sense of to be alive, and start reciting their poems. And I have the poems in different languages too, also in Chinese. You notice that my first work, Velocity, are also in Chinese, in Euskera, in Catalan, etc. I didn't show you, but here you have. And also I have them in 3D models, so you can actually activate them and look at them closely, as this is part of the many possibilities. So so this is part of what I've been doing over the past years. The RoboPoemas, they are from the year 2015. I have other things to show you, but what I wanted to talk today primarily is my latest work, which has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. Initially, it was going to be a collective exhibition, and it was a collective exhibition. It was Vermont, it was for the whole Vermont. I don't know if the Vermont Humanities was involved, but it was called 2020, Vision 2020. So in preparation for all this new way of presenting different works of art all over the state of Vermont. But so we were going to, a group of us were going to give to present work in relation to the Anthropocene, messages from the Anthropocene, and I had a different idea, but then we had the pandemic, so I couldn't avoid not doing something about the pandemic. So what I'm going to do now is to present you with some of my reflections in relation to this project. Again, there are many. It's multimodal, it's multidisciplinary and tentacular. So it started again with a poem called Marivirus. And in this particular occasion, it was part of a gallery exhibition. I'm going to read some elements while you can see a little bit of the exhibition. The COVID-19 pandemic has led to a profound crisis that reveals the fragility and arrogance of the so-called human principles. These principles are implicit in the allegory of origin that links names to what is named. Let there be light, and there was light. In the 20th century, this demiurgic link was dismantled during the literary experiments of the avant-garde. Okay. Or the opposite, confidence in language was emphasized. I'm just looking at what I'm doing there. By the very fact of achieving its rupture. What remained after this crisis that the split signified from signifier was the principle of analogy activated by the literary post-avant-garde in a historical moment of deep anguish after 2 world wars. Okay. So what I am expressing here, I don't want to read too much because because this is a very dense work, but I would like to read a little bit more. In the new millennium, with the pandemic and the newest AI technologies, a new crisis of representation is evident, a crisis to which the multimedia project Marivirus, Virus and the Sea appeals, anchored in the algorithm as a literary and metaphorical principle. Technology served, particularly in this time of crisis, as ally and intermediary, establishing the network of a collective while reframing the post-human condition. November 13, 2020. This was the designated date for the opening of a group exhibition, Messages from the Anthropocene, at the Flindog Gallery here in Burlington, Vermont. The exhibition confronted the devastating human impact on our environment. My section addressed the pandemic in a multimodal installation called, as I said, Mar y Virus, Virus and the Sea. Ironically, the day of the opening of the exhibition, which was November 13, 2020, coincided with the day of the formal closing of all social events by the governor of Vermont. The incongruity of the opening of a group exhibition deactivated by the pandemic allowed me to exponentially expand my installation during the following months, adding multiple stickers of the viruses that eventually moved out of my segment and into the gallery as a whole. Stickers gradually replicated across floors, chairs, tables, and the ceiling, echoing the motion of the actual virus. On a broader scale, I did the same with the QRs, inviting viewers to share COVID-19 stories in both English and Spanish. Cuenta tu historia COVID, share your COVID story. I posted QRs all over Burlington and sent the stickers to other countries to be posted on emblematic buildings and places in an effort to create a global community in times of profound isolation. QR codes then acted as an interface during the pandemic. The expectation of not touching and the fear of contagion became instances of reference and subversion permeated by technology, which invited and still invites connection and collective reflection. These testimonials are collected on an interface created for this purpose. The original installation at the Flindau Gallery therefore transferred into a larger multimodal elite project, electronic literature project, directly responding to the impact of COVID-19 on society and the environment. This larger project provided technological and aesthetic opportunities for connection and collaboration, sharing of the collective experience. At the same time, this project addresses the precarity of human agency and its exclusionist reference to human from a post-humanism ignited by the devastating crisis caused by the Anthropocene. Thinkers like Haraway and Braidotti postulate with post-humanism the imbrication with the non-human as a potential and intrinsic ally. These concepts reach new paradigms during the pandemic, since the virus that causes COVID-19 sweeps through from its non-living condition. That is, in principle, the virus is not. In the biological categories between living and dead, the virus does not belong to any of them. It has no entity. The references are essentially analogies. They are infective particles, inanimate organic matter, incomplete entities, etc. Analogies are sought to be able to name the virus, which has two possible sequences of 3 letters each one, DNA, RNA. Viruses, therefore, resemble bots in their presumed lack of sentiency, and at the same time, they both exist and act, imposing an inextricable paradox. My project seeks to make visible this antagonism and conflict of representation, while claiming a cyber-poetic re-evaluation from an intersectional feminist lens. So this project, Virus and the Sea, was part of this reconsideration from the perspective of poetry in its intersection with technology that became an essential ally in a period of deep anguish and isolation. This project included a poetic series anchored in the principles of the sea as a primal element and the virus as a sequence connected to medieval plagues and their permanence and residue in genetic aleatory processes that I transcribed as oleatory, from the Spanish word ola, meaning wave, thus complicating the concepts of generative genomic poetry. One of the main references for this project was, and continues to be, this QR code that I mentioned, that I posted around multiple cities, including Burlington, inviting people to share your COVID story in an attempt to create global community, as I said, at a time of this profound trauma. This QR code then acted both literally and metaphorically, as I said before, as an interface. The site collecting these testimonials includes other levels of cultural, electronic, and literary productions related to the pandemic, such as the aforementioned oleatory generative hacked poetry, a CAPTCHA poemat, video poems, a gallery installation, and this one, etc. So what we are going to do now is to visit some of these elements, parts of the project. I'm going to show you a couple of them. One is this poema oleatorio, as I mentioned, and here this is a generative poem. This is a poem that that is based on an algorithm that I hacked. It's a hacked poem. So you can, it recreates itself all the time. It's called Marivirus, Virus and the Sea, with translation by Christine Dijkstra. And so you can just, the poem regenerates itself with each link. And we can read some of the, I will read it in Spanish, since my Spanish is definitely better than my English. But for example, somos residuos que acaso nos abrazan o enarbolan. Defensas del espectro de la historia. El virus equilibra, mata, nos mata, redondo como el mundo y sin esquinas, que penetran alveolos y te ahogan. So I say it's oleatory because it's like the sea. That is the concept that I just mentioned. I was reading, and it's oleatory, like ola, meaning wave, instead of aleatory, which is also a generative aspect, technological aspect of this particular poem. And it's a hack poem because if you go to the like the DNA, which is the base source, you are going to see that this poem is a hack. It's like a virus in the sense that I enter within another different poem from someone else, of course, with permission in this case. So it's not a secret hacking. And you can see in this like the virus inserting into the DNA, and you can see some of the roots of this poem, and it says Marivirus, un oleaje viral en tiempos de pandemia, virus and the sea, an oleatory poem in terms of the pandemic. And this is based on a poem by Nick Montfort called Las Aventuras de la Muerte, which is something like the adventures of death. So I use all these elements of death also as part of the investigation of these times of the pandemic, with intersection of poetry and technology. And now I'm going to the CAPTCHA poemat, Poema CAPTCHA, which is and is not a CAPTCHA, and is not and is and is not a poem, a poema. So here you are. So here is select images with masks. So there are different levels, and so you have some information here saying that is a CAPTCHA. But what I did, one of my main philosophies as an artist, as a poet that uses technology, is to see technology as an ally. And I think this was particularly real during the pandemic. So what I did is changing the original acronym of the CAPTCHA, which is I don't have it right now, but it's Computer Automatic Public Turing Test, to separate humans, to make humans and computers apart. So distinguished between humans and technology. So that's interesting because, they do this. So the bots, interestingly enough, the bots that use, when you use a CAPTCHA, what they do, the bots recognize what they are not. And we are supposed to be humans in reference to these elements that are presented to us. But I changed that. I changed the acronym, and I said, I don't know if it is here, but I said Computer Automatic Public Tests to tie computers and humans as allies. And that's my main reference, not only with my poetry in interaction with technology, but also in the way I perceive the trauma and the isolation during the COVID-19 that made the possibility of connection through technology. So it's an ally and not the enemy, as usually, and it's been traditional, one of the perceptions about technology and humanity. So here, for example, you have masks. These are, as you know, this is the Flynn. So these are QR codes that well, here is just the you have to recognize the masks, and also you can see segments of the poem I just read. And as you see, these are actually perhaps you will see later that this is taken from, they are screenshots from the main banner with the poem that I presented in the gallery. So everything is related. And you can also listen to the poems in both English and Spanish in segments of the poems.
Yeah, I'm afraid we're unable to hear that, Tina, but that's okay.
Okay, that's fine, no problem. But you can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so here you have, here this says select all images with QR COVID code. So you go around and see the COVID, the QR codes that these QR codes are inviting people to share their stories, their testimonials about the COVID-19. And these stickers, I send these stickers to many countries too. I send it to Mexico. I have people there posting these QR codes, and then I brought them to different countries and cities to establish that connection. So let's see if I did it right. Verify. Yes, I did. So here is COVID file, COVID-19 archivadores, the file cabinets were part of the gallery show. And also the archivadores is a way of QR, but analogic in a way, because it has information. So it documents as well. So here we have this. We can make mistakes, so we can see what happens if I don't do it right. Okay, for example, here you have to try it again. And finally, I have to select images in relation to the exhibition itself. So here they are. And finally, you go to the matrix of the origin of all this project, which was the gallery show. So here you have the QR codes. You have information about the exhibition itself, which was part of the messages from the Anthropocene. And then you can listen to the scene. You cannot, because there is a problem with the sound, but it's not really, there is not much to miss really. And you can always go to my webpage and investigate all of this, right? So just to conclude, just have a couple of sentences. Okay. In conclusion, the installation and project Marivirus, Virus and the Sea, reconceptualizes multiple combinatory electronic options that address, among other levels, a crisis of representation in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. The technotexts presented in this project, such as the Poem CAPTCHA, request recognition and proof, a test of what subtly makes us human, based on the principles of inclusion, connection, transfeminism, and cyber poetry, a test that potentially points to a new and necessary meta-narrative of collaboration and technology-based connection ally, which is share your COVID story. And here is the interface where you can share your COVID story. You just go here and record with your camera. And that's something I invite all of you to do, if you feel like. So that's pretty much in a nutshell some of the things I've done over the past a couple of decades, and more recently with this project called Marivirus. And I can talk a little bit more if you are interested in where it's going, this particular project right now. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you. I want to make sure people can see me. Let me remove the spotlight. That's really fascinating. One of the things that I really resonated with or piqued my interest was the way that you use the HTML comment tag in order to, like you said, to kind of the way the virus embeds the DNA, that you're like injecting the poem in there. And so it's literally meta in that. I guess unless people are going into code view, they're maybe not even going into view source. They're maybe not even knowing that that's happening. Is that true?
Yes. Oh, actually, the meta part is the whole concept, because that's the whole idea since I started with this. The velocity poems are meta too. I mean, it's an investigation of the way that we interact with technology. So when we are talking about the virus, the hacking is a way of behaving as a virus, entering within the main algorithm and inserting and transforming it in something else. So yes, it's meta to that point too, to not only in context as a poem, but also in the way that I've been experimenting with all these ideas. So yes, it's fascinating to get inside the poem itself. It's something that everybody can do. I mean, you just go to this, or I mean, everybody can do to see what are the las tripas, what are the guts of each website. It's just you go to the source, which is right there, and then a different level is to manipulate those things. That's another level to do, which is what I did with this particular poem of Nick Mumford.
And what have you done to keep up with? I mean, you learned Flash, and I remember I had learned HTML, and then I tried to do programming in Flash and found it just so difficult, like what they call the object-oriented programming. Has it been harder to keep up as these technologies have evolved over
This is a great question. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I interrupted you. Yes. That's a problem. That's the problem with technology, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting because there are new things going on, and the sophistication, the complication, it gets more and more complicated. So the possibilities are even bigger and larger and extraordinary and beautiful too. What happened to me is I never really relied on one particular mode. For example, I was using Flash animation I was my first tool, and I enjoyed it very much. It was my canvas. But I wasn't doing just that. I mean, I was interested in conceptual and poetic possibilities with, for example, barcodes. So, and that was something that I did simultaneously. And so there is not much of technology in terms of how to use the barcodes. It's right there. I just conceptualize the concept, and I use, for example, barcode generators, which is very simple. And then I did robotics because I was again fascinated with this anxiety created by new technology through robotics, through the bots, and how to present that from a different point of view, with the point of view of robots. To create that was more challenging, but obviously I wasn't able to do. I mean, after all, I'm a faculty of Spanish at the University of Vermont. I mean, I have lots of limitations, and robotics is not necessarily my training. So I collaborated in this case for the robotics part with IT Wesley Allen Wright from UVM, but I created the other things in my own way. So I don't rely on one particular thing. I just get really inspired by other possibilities. Right now, I'm not investing my life, my time in one particular program. I'm very intrigued by AI, and that's actually one of the things I'm doing. I'm working with DALI, which is one of these open sources, open AIs, visual AIs. So I just keep going. I maneuver around my interests and my what inspires me beyond specific understanding of one particular program or coding, for example. For example, is one of the things I'm working on is to do an emoji poem, a sonnet, and that's not easy. So I just keep evolving and moving around without having to be engaged in one particular way of working or tool. So I just, I go around and see what inspires me. What I'm doing now with the with this COVID-19 project, the Marivirus project, is collaborate. I am collaborating with artists from different media to work with this QR code that's a simple QR code that invites people to share their COVID stories, right? And I have an interface where all these stories are being collected, right? So I collaborated with a Vermont artist, Thomas Brown from Vermont, who lives now in Italy, who does mixed media. So we created this huge 50 by 50 QR code. I could talk about many layers related to that. I collaborated this December with another artist doing with the same QR code, but with objects, poetic objects, and her field is mostly textiles, so it's with fabric. So we are experimenting with fabric. So I'm going to keep trying to make different ways of experiencing poetry and facing poetry that combines primarily technology and other medium. So I just keep, experimenting.
Yeah, I just want to, if anyone else has questions, you can type them into the chat and we'll ask them of Tina here. You had mentioned that, frequently computers and humans are seen as enemies, and you're hoping, to recognize them as allies in the work that you do. I think the same could be said for the humanities and STEM, that these are sort of, poetry is over here, and then science, places like Generator are over there. Although we have done work with Generator in the last couple of years to have lectures and discussions about AI, for instance. So I just really reflect on that it's kind of a change in a mindset to see, like, okay, so where is the poetry in our interfacing with computers, given that they're so enmeshed in our lives, probably irrevocably from here on out, and that the pandemic really sped that up, also sped up the what it seemed like, like that we were already at a place of how could technology become even more part of our life, and then the pandemic took it to much further levels.
Yeah, that's the big contradiction, right? The paradox in a way. We live in a post-digital time. Post-digital meaning that the digital stopped being a revolution because it's part of our lives, right? It's right there. We have our own computers, very tiny smartphones. So we really depend on them in many ways. So there is a combination of the human and the technology right now. And at the same time, there is still this debate, this anxiety, which is something I want to explore and question absolutely. So yeah, it's a hollow fear, the fear of technology. It's more, it was more present now that we are in the post-digital. There is a more recognition of that connection and in a very deep level. And of course, there are also issues and concerns about it. But the truth that there is these very, very strong connections. But when this age of information started, the fear was very strong and the division was very clearly determined. But there are new theories, new ways of presenting conceptually these relations, like the post-human, right? But the post-human also being a new, no, it's not new, but a way of presenting ourselves in connection with other species, for example. So technology allows for that as well. So it's a redefinition. We're in the middle of a revolution, especially with AI. And this is very new. I mean, technology is not definitely new. I mean, technology is very, very old. The book is technology too. But the way that AI is being established is extremely recent. So we still need to see, we're trying to put ourselves within this other level of our presence in regards to the bots, the robots, the AI, artificial intelligence. Yeah, I think that this is going to be resolved. I mean, resolved. It's never going to be resolved, but in a way, there is this conversation, and that division between humanities and STEM is being reconsidered finally, and it makes perfect sense to establish a more clear connection. But I really don't know where it's going right now. The humanities are still hurting.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, what they call about STEAM, where arts, and I would say arts and the humanities are an integral part of the scientific disciplines. So I do have a question here from DJ. How did you get the original idea to combine poetry and technology?
I don't know. It happened. It happened. I've been writing poetry all my life. I mean, since I was a kid, right? So I've been a writer of not traditional, I mean, conventional poetry, like in paper. When I came to the United States, I was exposed to the computers. So for me, it was extremely intriguing, the fact that there was in that time, late 80s, imagine, right? It was it was dark. It was like blank. It was black, like the black screen, and then there was this palpitation. I usually talk about this, but this palpitation of the cursor, like it's calling me, boom, 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 boom. So it was, I let myself go, and I say, yes, I'm here. Also because I come from very humble origins in many ways, and so it was a way of saving me. And also I created another person. So in this realm, I am Alma Perez. Alma Perez being Alma with an @ sign. So I became a cybernetic entity in a way, just to balance that sense of displacement that I had. I became Tina Escaja much recently, which is my name. So yes, it saved me. I mean, for me, it was an important, a fascinating opportunity to create, in this case, poetry with different tools, and I'm being very, very excited about it. It is also true that it took a long time. I was never looking for recognition or anything, but eventually it happened. It happened that there is a strong interest relatively recently about electronic literature. So I'm considered a pioneer, partly because my first works were in 2000 in Spanish. And that's the other paradox that we are talking about, and I'm kind of extrapolating this question, but the paradox is that people don't really know much about electronic literature while we are still very much embedded into the technological realm, right? So electronic literature is this kind of literature I've been showing you. And that's the literature that my students, for example, love. I don't necessarily show my work. I don't even think that they know that I'm doing this, but they love this work. And at the same time, this is not being taught. No, it's not there. I mean, people don't know about this. That's one of those strange paradoxes that eventually will not happen, right? Because the experimentation with literature has been always there. Well, 20th century with the avant-garde, and now we have technology to create that movement that wasn't possible during the avant-garde with the calligrama. So how did I start it? Just by being fascinated with the avant-garde, for example, with experimenting with poetry with a new tool. And the tool is the electronic realm, the technology in general, being not only internet and electronic literature, because I don't fit there either. I mean, I do robots, and they are three-dimensional, they are real, they move. I do barcode stuff. So for me, technology is a way of expressing and to experiencing poetry. And I think it's very intriguing and for me fascinating. So somehow that's the way I started and continue.
Yeah, I really resonate with you talking about the green screen blinking cursor. I mean, I'm old enough to remember 2K Commodore PETs, so pre-internet computing. And, my daughter, who's 22, has only know in a world in which there's Wi-Fi and you're constantly connected through your smartphone. I do have a question here from Kim. She asks, I wonder about owning the rights to the poetry. Do you somehow watermark your work?
No, I
And
don't.
yeah, and why don't you?
Oh, I never thought about this. This is not the first time I've been asked something similar because, for example, I have one of my books of poetry called Trece Lunas. Trece, by the way, it was recognized in a prize recently in its bilingual format last October, Juan Felipe Herrera Award, because I do write books of poems too, but they go beyond the page and something else happened, right? So I have one of these books that completely available on the internet. I watermark it, but that's the beauty and the limits of the internet is that too. I mean, the possibility of presenting your work to a very ample audience. It also can be lost in that magnitude as well. But at least this is an advantage over the past or over the present too, the fact that it's difficult to publish in paper and to establish these parameters of ownership. The death of the author, it was something to be discussed also in the 90s, right, or the 80s. So no, I do my work and I present it under my name or under Alma Perez's name. And ownership is not necessarily my goal, but it's usually respected. I don't see, for me, it's not necessarily a problem. I will say that that's a very interesting question, especially thinking in AI, which is part of the latest discussions with visual art. So if an AI DALI using, for example, a Corona DALI uses visual art from other people, where is the copyright for that? Where is the ownership? I haven't been, I never had the sense that is necessarily the case for poetry, but it probably is the case as well. But it's something that doesn't really concern me. For me, it's important to have it out there. And if someone wants to steal it, I'm okay with it. Poetry has never, if that's not, market element of poetry is not really, it's never been one of the priorities, I don't think. So I don't know if I am answering this question, but it's not an issue for me. I don't copyright it. I mean, it's there under my name. That's definitely the case. And the work of electronic literature is extremely difficult to steal. That's true too, because I have, I was stealing the other one, right? With hacking, that's true too. No, but it's not so simple.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you think about, and I really know very little about this, but you can tell Chat GPT or these other tools to say, write me a 6-stanza poem in the form of, Shakespeare or Browning or something like that, and it'll do it. And we understand poetry as an expression from a single person, right? From them expressing their soul, their experience. And what AI, from how I understand it, is doing is actually grabbing from everybody's experience that's available on the internet and kind of creating a mishmash of something that then appears to be someone expressing their unique human experience. So it's kind of a very different way of looking at that.
It creates something new and original, but it's true there is an issue there of getting the words, the thoughts from other people, other humans in this case. So, but it really expresses the consciousness, the global consciousness as well, what is happening now. I use it. I use it. Again, I have a project where I've been using DALI as visual. I haven't done it much in terms of language itself, but I would like to try. I mean, what is a poem anyway, right? If I think that, for example, a 17th century poem, a traditional sonnet, this is an algorithm. You have to maintain some metrica. In Spanish we call metrica. So you have to do a number of syllables, a number of rhymes. So this is kind of mechanical. It's just an expression of a craft, of an ability to establish those 4 stanzas. So why not an AI going and creating algorithmically, sorry.
That's okay.
A sonnet, right? Is that bad? Not necessarily. It's a new product. But still, I didn't, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember having written something and I just felt really good about a particular phrase that I used. And then a year or 2 later, going through a book that I had read before, and like I had completely lifted, almost word for word without knowing that I was doing that. But, I had absorbed this and it meant something to me. And then I sort of reproduced it later, which is a bit maybe what AI does on a much grander scale. Its ability to absorb things outpaces what a single human can do. I mean, I'm all saying this like my preference is to go and write in a notebook with a fountain pen, but that's just me. So,
or Neruda, like writing with green ink. So that's, but it's true. I mean, originality is relative, right? Because we observe all the traditions. The absorption now is another level, as you said too, by AI. So,
unless there's any other questions that people have, I think we're about at our hour. I want to thank folks for joining us this evening, and thank you, Tina, for a great presentation, for giving us things to ponder, and look forward to seeing more of your work in the near future.
Of course. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.